The Caprice of Ash and Echoes, Elara's Requiem. Chapter 1. The Salon and the Shadow. The air in the officers' salon was thick with cigar smoke and the sickly sweet scent of schnapps. Outside, the Warsaw Ghetto slept, or pretended to, a cage holding 70,000 ghosts waiting for dawn. Inside, Elara stood beneath the single, gaudy chandelier, her dress a rented, threadbare black velvet that felt like a costume for her own execution. Her violin, a worn, dark instrument she called Marta, rested against her shoulder. It was her protection and her curse. By day, Marta was silenced, hidden in a false floor, smelling of chlorine and wet earth. By night, she sang for the executioners, echoing against polished brass and brutal luxury. Elara's fingers, swollen and cold from hours spent wading through sewage, trembled slightly. She looked past the row of starched grey uniforms, past the ruddy, self-satisfied faces of the ranking officers, and saw only the map of the tunnels etched behind her eyes. The slick concrete, the smell of sulphur and fear, the endless, echoing darkness. Tonight was her last night. It was the eve of the final, desperate act, the uprising. She drew her bow across the strings, and the silence in the room fractured. She began with Brahms, a piece designed to soothe, to lull, to make these men feel cultured, tragic, and, crucially, safe. But beneath the melody, Elara was listening, always listening to the ghost sounds of the earth beneath their feet. Chapter 2. The Mole's Canvas. In the claustrophobic hours of the morning, before the officers awoke, Elara shed her velvet armour and became the mole. Her performance clothes, already stained with the damp earth of 1,000 previous tunnels, were swapped for heavy water-resistant canvas. The scent of cologne and cigar smoke was replaced by the acrid musk of decay. Her mission was simple, impossible, and repeated. Find the children. She used the back entrance of the old bathhouse, where a loose pipe provided the entry point to the labyrinthine sewer system beneath the ghetto walls. The tunnels were a world unto themselves, a cold, flowing river of waste and lifeblood. They were the artery of escape, connecting the desperate few to the Aryan side. She was the shepherdess of shadows. "You must be silent," she would whisper, her voice rough against the damp air. "You are a shadow, not a sound, not a single tear." She carried the small ones mostly, tucking them into the slings she wore beneath her coat. She taught them the rhythm of the escape, the 4 counts of wading, the 2 counts of careful climbing over a grate, the single count of holding one's breath as the patrol boots clanged above, mere inches from their heads. Chapter 3. The Final Cargo. Zofia, only 10, was small but fierce. She had Elara's dark, expressive eyes, but where Elara's eyes held sorrow, Zofia's held only defiance. "Mama, why do I have to wait?" Zofia had asked weeks ago, her voice tight with confusion. All her friends had gone. "Because, little bird," Elara had stroked her cheek, her hands raw from the chlorine solution she used to sterilize her skin before her concerts, "you are my reason. I have to make sure the path is clear. You are the final, most precious piece of cargo." The final shipment, Zofia, 3 other children, and a resistance fighter named Marek, required the best cover. The escape route tonight lay directly beneath the floorboards of the SS command post. The drilling, the scraping, the prying open of the final manhole cover, it needed an orchestral roar to silence it. The cover was the music. The officers' weekly music night had inadvertently become the perfect alibi, a shield of sound and complacency. Elara had trained for this specific, shattering moment for months. The music was not art tonight, it was a military strategy. Chapter 4. April 19th, 1943. April 19th, 1943. The day arrived with the sound of boots marching in unison, but this time they were not just patrolling, they were crushing the great inevitable counterstrike against the ghetto's resistance. The uprising was underway. The morning was a blur of gunfire and explosions. Elara moved through the smoking streets, her eyes wide, pretending to fetch water while mapping the progress of the battle. The Jewish fighting organization, Job, was holding them off, but the price was fire and blood. By evening, the heart of the ghetto was burning. Smoke billowed over the walls, turning the sunset a venomous, bruised purple. Inside the officers' salon, the atmosphere was different. It was tense, aggressive. The men were delayed, inconvenienced, and furious that mere Jews dared to fight back. The commanding officer, Hauptsturmführer Kress, a stout man with a monocle and a frighteningly soft spot for Mozart, slammed his fist on the table, silencing the anxious chatter. "The vermin are proving stubborn, Elara," Kress sneered, adjusting his cuff. "Play something triumphant, something to remind us of our superiority." Chapter 5. The Descent into Madness. Elara set Marta under her chin. She had prepared a program of quiet, reflective pieces, a deliberate choice to make the escape easier. But Kress's demand changed everything. Triumphant. She needed deafening. She needed chaos. The escorts were already in position. The plan was fixed. At the crescendo, Marek would use a muffled pneumatic drill to loosen the final brick Elara needed to generate a curtain of noise so thick it would absorb the grinding of stone on metal. Elara took a deep, shuddering breath. She didn't play a triumph. She played a descent into madness, a piece of sheer, overwhelming virtuosity. She launched into Niccolo Paganini's Caprice No. 24. The Caprice was a whirlwind of impossible technique, a series of variations so fast, so demanding, that they required every flicker of strength in her aching body. The first variation was a blur of staccato notes, sharp and demanding, cutting through the silence like shards of glass. The officers blinked, surprised by the sudden necessary violence of the music. Chapter 6. The Furious Dance. Elara didn't watch their faces. She watched the wall directly opposite Kress's chair, where the faint sound of work had to be in progress. Her music was now synchronized with the slow, agonizing process below. Marek was removing the first layers of soil and rubble. Scratch, scratch, thrum. She played the arpeggios, flying up and down the neck of Marta, the notes so rapid they smeared into a continuous, frantic wail. The sound she was making was a mask, a curtain of noise woven from precision and terror. It had to be loud enough, dense enough to consume the faint tap, tap, tap from the floor. Kress, initially annoyed, was now utterly rapt. He leaned forward, fascinated by the furious dance of her fingers. The double stops began. 2 strings played simultaneously. Elara pressed the bow with brutal force, making the sound resonant and deep, simulating the tremor of the muffled drill starting its work. Whir. Groan. The machinery of war merged with the machinery of art. She reached the section of variations in thirds and sixths, where the melody seemed to tear itself apart. It was no longer a performance, it was a physical battle. "Hurry, Zofia! Hurry!" She drove the music with the desperation of a mother pushing her child toward the light. Chapter 7. The Unbroken Cry. The tension in the room was palpable. The officers were sweating, their faces flushed. They were listening, truly listening, but only to the surface noise. The final variation approached, the moment of absolute, unrestrained virtuosity. This was the point where the manhole cover, loosened by hours of careful work, would be moved just enough for Zofia and the others to slip into the main sewer line, and away Elara took the theme and drove it into a final, ferocious climax. She was all attack, all raw energy. Her shoulder ached, her wrist screamed, but she pushed through, the notes blurring into a continuous, thundering roar that silenced the noise of the uprising momentarily. In that single, deafening torrent of sound, Elara felt a faint, almost imperceptible tremor beneath her feet. It was the sound of the final manhole brick shifting, the sound of Zofia moving. She held the highest note for what felt like an eternity, a piercing, desperate cry of triumph and loss. Then, with a final, heart-stopping snap of the bow striking the string, it was over. The silence that followed was heavier and colder than any noise. Elara stood utterly still, her chest heaving. Nothing. They were gone. Kress broke the silence. "Magnificent, Elara! That was violence perfectly executed." Chapter 8. The Requiem of Fire. As Kress offered her a cognac, a lower-ranking officer burst through the door, his face pale and dirtied with ash. "Hauptsturmführer, the fire has reached the central command block. The vermin are using the sewers to escape. We have reports of unauthorized manhole breaches in Sector 3. Kress cursed, smashing his glass on the table. He stood up, towering over Elara, his face contorted in murderous rage. He pointed a finger at her. "You. The music stops. You will remain here. No one leaves." Elara felt the cold certainty of her capture settle upon her. She had played her final concert, and the curtain had fallen. Her goal, however, was already outside the walls. As Crest screamed orders to his men, Elara looked down at Marta, her accomplice. A sudden, earth-shaking explosion rocked the building. In the ensuing chaos, Elara did not run. She simply picked up her violin. She raised Marta one final time, not to her shoulder, but to her chest. Then, with a calculated swing born of months of quiet fury, she smashed the delicate scroll of the violin against the temple of the officer nearest to her. He crumpled, stunned. As the Nazi officers seized her, Elara closed her eyes. The last sound she heard above the shouts and the raging fires was not the sound of the gun being cocked, but the echo of the Caprice, a fierce, desperate, and beautiful lullaby for her child. Days later, when the rubble was still hot and the ghetto was quiet, a small girl with fierce, dark eyes emerged from a drainpipe far outside the walls. She was filthy, weak, and alone, but clutched tightly in her hand was a single silver tuning key, the one Elara had removed from Marta before the final performance Zofia ran, guided by the sound of hope, leaving behind the city of ash, where her mother's requiem still echoed, immortal and unbroken.